Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking the modern global hunger crisis. But to really understand it, we actually need to start by looking backward, at the completely fictional ways the West has historically viewed the developing world. It's a wild journey, going from early 20th century imaginations right up to the very real, data-driven crises staring us down in 2026. Let's get into it.
So how much of what we think we know about the developing world is actually based on fiction? We like to think our understanding of global issues is rooted in hard facts. But the truth is, for over a century, our foundational ideas about places like sub-Saharan Africa were built almost entirely on imagination. People literally constructed these massive, continent-spanning narratives just to serve their own cultural needs, completely ignoring the reality of the people who actually lived there.
Section 1. The Imagined Africa. Let's head back to the early 20th century. We're going to look at two deeply influential American figures who built very different but equally fictional versions of Africa. And get this, neither of them had ever even set foot on the continent. First up, Edgar Rice Burroughs. He's the science fiction writer who created Tarzan back in 1912. He imagined Africa as this primitive, savage playground. In his stories, a white male raised by apes is somehow physically and morally superior to the local black Africans, who are written off as weak or superstitious. It was essentially a projection of masculine adventure, a foil for Western civilization. But then, on the flip side, you had Marcus Garvey. He was a charismatic Jamaican immigrant who founded the United Negro Improvement Association. Garvey pitched a totally different fiction, a redemptive, utopian homeland. He sold millions of people on this Back to Africa movement, painting the continent as a land flowing with milk and honey, a place of millennial hope to escape American racism. So what do these two radically different guys have in common? They both projected their own needs onto a blank slate, completely bypassing the complex, everyday reality of actual Africans.
Section 2. The Food Waste Paradox.
Okay, let's pivot away from those outdated, imagined narratives and look at the modern reality of the developing world. Because what happens when those old myths meet reality? Well, when we finally drop the historical tropes of primitive helplessness, we are forced to confront a seriously broken global system, one that's operating right under our noses. We start to realize that the crises we face today aren't about a lack of capability, but rather a massive failure in how our modern world manages its resources. Take a look at this quote from the World Food Program. Global hunger isn't about a lack of food. Just let that sink in for a second. We usually picture hunger as an absolute shortage, right? Like a barren planet that just can't provide. But the actual reality? The world currently produces more than enough food to nourish every single child, woman, and man on the planet right now. And yet, shockingly, nearly 1/5 of all food produced globally for human consumption every single year is squandered or lost. 1/5. That is 1 billion meals thrown away every single day. And if you're wondering about the financial toll, it costs the global economy a staggering $1 trillion annually. Oh, and it also generates up to 10% of global greenhouse gas emissions. It's wild. Now, what's really fascinating is where that waste actually happens, because it perfectly highlights the huge divide between wealthy and developing nations. 60% of this food waste happens right at the household level. That's primarily in richer countries, in our own kitchens when we buy too much, cook too much, or just let things go bad in the back of the fridge. But for millions in the developing world, the food is lost before it ever even reaches a plate. It's lost in the fields at harvest time because of poor storage facilities, pest infestations, or just a lack of access to markets and proper transport.
Section 3. True Drivers of Hunger.
So if a lack of food isn't the problem, we really need to look at the systemic mechanics that are causing mass starvation today. Throw out those outdated tropes of a helpless developing world. The reality is a compounding mix of man-made and environmental disasters. The true systemic drivers of hunger are armed conflict, climate shocks, extreme weather like severe droughts and flooding, devastating economic collapse and inflation, and massive shortfalls in humanitarian funding. These are the forces impartially devastating entire regions, wiping out supply chains and destroying livelihoods overnight.
To put a human face on these drivers, just look at Sudan. You have escalating armed violence there that has internally displaced nearly 10 million people. Combine that with massive flooding and a totally crippled economy, and the food systems have completely collapsed. On top of that, social norms often limit women's control over resources. As a result, a staggering 73% of women in Sudan currently lack access to enough food to stay healthy. It is a stark, heartbreaking reminder of how systemic collapse disproportionately hits the most vulnerable people. Section 4.
2026 Global Hunger Hotspots.
Let's take a data-driven look at exactly where these systemic drivers are causing the most devastation right now, based on the UN's dire projections for 2026. At the absolute highest level of concern, meaning these populations are either at risk of famine or already facing catastrophic starvation, we have Sudan, the occupied Palestinian territories, South Sudan, Haiti, Mali, Yemen, and Afghanistan. In the occupied Palestinian territories, for example, massive infrastructure destruction has ruined an estimated 86% of croplands. And just below that tier, facing very high concern, you have nations like the Democratic Republic of Congo, Myanmar, Nigeria, Somalia, and Syria.
It is so easy to get lost in these massive, overwhelming statistics, so I really want to ground this in everyday reality. Listen to this from Dr. Abdurrahman, who treats malnourished children at a health center in Somalia. He noted, the issue of malnutrition is steadily increasing day by day. This is due to the crises in the country, whether droughts or conflicts. These frontline medical workers are out there dealing with the direct fallout of extreme weather and regional instability every single day.
And to highlight those economic and funding gaps we talked about earlier, consider this number, 98%. In Afghanistan's Sher-e-Buzurg district, 98% of households report a poor food consumption score. Why? Because on top of localized flooding and earthquakes, massive humanitarian funding cuts have literally forced organizations to stop life-saving programs. The food exists globally, for sure, but the funds to distribute it locally, they're vanishing.
Section 5. Fighting the Hunger Crisis.
Okay, we've seen the myth and we've seen the grim reality. Now let's focus on the actionable fight against this crisis and how we restore agency to these regions. One of the United Nations' top sustainable development goals is incredibly clear and very ambitious: cut global food waste in half by 2030. But achieving this means we have to completely move past those imaginary historical perceptions of the developing world. It requires us to treat these regions as equal partners and focus on building actionable resilience in farming communities.
Organizations like the World Food Program are doing practical, on-the-ground interventions to stop food loss right at the source. Remember how we said developing nations lose their food mostly post-harvest? Well, step 1 is providing training in improved post-harvest handling methods for smallholder farmers. Step 2, providing subsidized water and airproof storage equipment so the crops don't rot or get eaten by pests. And Step 3, boosting access to local markets by building or rehabilitating roads and bridges, and sourcing local crops for school meal programs. It's practical, it's highly systemic, and honestly, it works.
But the responsibility isn't just on farmers across the globe. Since 60% of global food waste happens right in our own households, it is vital to remember that our individual actions directly impact the resources needed to fight this crisis. Think about it. When we waste less food in our own kitchens, we are quite literally saving the global resources: the land, the water, the energy, and the greenhouse gas emissions that go into producing that food in the first place.
I want to leave you with this final provocative thought to challenge how you view the developing world. We started today by looking at how the West essentially invented fictional versions of these continents. But the modern reality is that we are living in a massive paradox. We produce enough food to nourish every single person on Earth, yet millions face famine because of conflict, climate change, and just mind-boggling waste. So here's the question: will we fix our broken systems before these hunger hotspots spread even further? I really hope this explainer inspires you to look past the myths and learn a bit more about how we can actually solve the global hunger paradox. Thanks for joining me, and keep exploring the facts.